end, and we know we think is important, but there's that. All right, Kate.
All right, joining us right now is Republican Congressman from Florida, Trump campaign surrogate Byron Donalds. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming in. Bouncing off the conversation that Harry and Sarah were just having, how undecided do you think the diminishing number of undecided voters really are this election at this point?
I believe they're somewhat undecided. I think they're juggling through the realities of America. Number one, the economy, this massive inflation created by Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. The immigration problems in our country are real. They're looking at that. But then I also do believe they're having to juggle with also a lot of the rhetoric that's out there in terms of where the country's going and who's going to protect the country. And I think if you look at the facts are very clear that Donald Trump addresses the issues that concerns Americans, the economy, our borders, and our foreign policy. And what Vice President Harris is talking about is not those issues. She's talking about wanting to look forward, or unfortunately, there's still a lot of negative rhetoric coming from her campaign, basically saying, her and her surrogates, that Donald Trump is some threat to democracy, which is a flat out lie. And that lie can be proven to be a lie because he was already president of the United States. The country was thriving when he was president of the United States, and there were no new wars when he was president of the United States.
In terms of rhetoric, do you think Donald Trump and the Trump campaign, do you think they have a problem with rhetoric as well?
No, and I don't. I think especially in light of the fact that there has now been a second assassination attempt on the life of President Trump, I do not believe so. What we are seeing now is that you do have radical elements of the Democrat Party, people who have been radicalized by the hateful rhetoric from Democrat officials, talking about how he's a threat to democracy, but that's simply not true. Talking about how he wants to bring in Project 2025. We know that is not true. That is a lie. Donald Trump has distanced himself from that. The Heritage Foundation has said he has nothing to do with it, but they say these things anyway. What Donald Trump has been talking about is we're going to fix our borders. We're going to have a great economy again. We're going to get out of these conflicts. We're going to make America great again. That is his rhetoric. So I think if you compare the nastiness from Kamala Harris's campaign and from the Democrat Party compared to what we've been talking about really for the last 9 years, but specifically the last year and a half in this campaign, no, I do not agree that it is the same rhetoric. There's no moral equivalency in the rhetoric between these two campaigns.
I think any serious person would also say, Congressman, that Donald Trump is a source of heated and dangerous rhetoric over months and years. I mean, even Republicans who support him and are voting for him this election have basically begged him to tone it down. So if Republicans who even support you say that you've got a problem, you need to tone it down, you've got a mayor in Springfield, Ohio saying you guys need to tone it down because we now have bomb threats on schools in our area. There's a problem also, in the general rhetoric of the campaign that the term that is often criticized, but that if you want to say both sides should address, but right, logically?
Well, actually, let's dig into this a little bit more. And thank you for bringing this up. Yes, we've heard from the Springfield mayor, and nobody wants bomb threats or anything like that. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have been talking about reports coming out of Springfield. J.D. Vance represents the state of Ohio. He's talking about things that his constituents have brought to him. But let's compare that to the fact that Kamala Harris in the debate last week, she lied about Donald Trump's bloodbath comments. Why did she say that? Because she wants to invoke a negative energy around the campaign of Donald Trump, frankly, to affect these undecided voters that we talked about at the top.
What does she want to talk about? I mean, Congressman, you and I have gone back and forth a lot about fact checking that can happen.
Kate, can you acknowledge that Kamala Harris lied about the Charlottesville comments again? Something that even Snopes has debunked and said is fake news, that it is wrong, that his statements were taken out of context. Those are the direct lies coming from Kamala Harris. So if you're going to talk about the invective put into this campaign that Kamala Harris and her campaign has done, trying to invoke a negative response from voters in our country, versus Donald Trump talking about issues, whether it be in a city or, quite frankly, you could bring up Aurora, Colorado, or you could bring up Denver, Colorado, that have been overrun by illegal immigrants.
There are
in our
lots of things
country.
that can be brought up, which is also, if you're talking about lies and you're talking about comparisons, you can talk about a long list of lies. We could walk through it. I don't think it is to the benefit of voters right now for me to walk through to remind them of the lies that Donald Trump has told in the past. Case in point, eating dogs and pets, or lots of other things. I want to move on because I do want to ask you.